true when I was a teacher at Bethel for 6 years, because Edwards posed and wrestled with so many weighty questions that I posed and my students posed and that were essential. I've been a pastor now for almost 8 years, and I can testify that the vision of Jonathan Edwards has made all the difference in the world. I'm deeply convinced that what our people need is God. God. They need a big vision of a holy, glorious, majestic, sovereign, just, wise, and gracious God. They need to see the whole panorama of His excellencies. They need to see a God-entranced man on Sunday morning and at the deacon meeting on Tuesday night. Robert Murray McCheyne, you all know, said, "What my people need is my personal holiness." But is not personal holiness simply a God-besotted life? A God-besotted life. And our people need God-entranced preaching. God Himself needs to be the subject of all our preaching in His majesty and holiness and greatness and glory and beauty and grace. When I say that, I don't mean that we shouldn't preach on nitty-gritty things like parenthood and divorce and AIDS, and gluttony and television and sex. We should take these up, but we should take them all the way up into the throne room of God and lay them bare to the roots of their Godwardness or their godlessness. What our people need is not nice little moral or psychological pep talks about how to get along in the world. Most of our people have no one who is laboring to placard God before their eyes. And so many of them are starved, and they don't know why they're starved. They don't know what to ask for. They interview pastors for their churches, and they don't know what questions to ask even. They don't know what's missing in their souls, by and large. They need the infinite God, the God-entranced vision of Jonathan Edwards. About 5 years ago, during a January prayer week, I resolved to an experiment. I wanted to preach a sermon on holiness of God. And so I said, I'm going to preach on holiness of God the first Sunday of prayer week, and I'm going to talk about pursuing that holiness the second week. And in the first week, I'm not going to say one sentence of application. And I took the text, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, seated upon a throne. And above Him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they flew. With 2 they covered their eyes. With 2 they covered their feet. And one said to the other, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook, and the temple was full of smoke." And I just took that one phrase at a time and did my best with Edwardsian imagery to unfold it, and sat down. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but one of the young families in our church had discovered that week that a child had been sexually abused in their family by a close relative. An incredibly traumatic experience. They were there that Sunday, listening. And I can imagine the advisors of preachers today saying to John Piper, "Piper, can't you see that there are hurting people in front of you? Can't you come down out of your ivory tower of theology and get practical? Don't you realize what kind of people come to your church every Sunday? Get practical, guy." Well, some weeks later, as the story emerged, the husband of that family came up to me and said, after a Sunday service, "John, these have been the hardest months of our lives. And you know what has gotten me through? The vision of the greatness of God's holiness that you gave me the first Sunday of prayer week." Nobody can tell me. I mean, it's just like water off a duck's back when I read stuff on the pastoral ministry. Nobody can tell me that theology and a vision of God is not practical. The same thing could be said about missions mobilization. We don't have time for this. We'll say much more about it, I'm sure, as the days go on. But in a word, the young people of my church are not fired up about denominations. They're not fired up about agencies. They get fired up about the vision of a global God with an unstoppable sovereign purpose to reach the hidden peoples of this world. They get excited about God in missions. And if you want your church to come alive about missions, preach God and His global purposes and His sovereign will to achieve those purposes. So I'm persuaded that the linchpin in the life of the church, in pastoral care and in missions mobilization, is a God-entranced worldview, and namely the vision of Jonathan Edwards in particular. It is not the prerogative or the product of an academic theologian. It is the heartbeat of a pastoral ministry. I want us to let Edwards this morning encourage us with his example. And I hope that you will all purchase some books. And I'm going to push him real hard, because I asked him to bring a lot of them. Get this biography, Ian Murray. In fact, get everything down there by Ian Murray. I've only read 3 books by Murray: The Puritan Hope and The Forgotten Spurgeon. All 3 of them, dynamite. Get this book and read about Edwards. If you don't want to buy these, if these are too expensive, mine were blue, they're brown now. Most of the stuff that's in print is in here. There are a few little things that aren't. These books, if you can stand the small print and the double column, are worth their weight in gold. And then if you want to just take one home, start with The Religious Affections. This paperback. This is not abridged and not paraphrased, and that's the way you ought to read it. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me as I get into Edwards as an example. There's not a person in this room who will be a Jonathan Edwards. He is in a class by himself. To think any thought like that will result in deep discouragement, as I have experienced. To think any thought of being like another person in this regard is deadly. Right over every book you read, over every seminar you attend, over every conference you go to, 1 Corinthians 15:10. By the grace of God, I am what I am. I wish I could have the strategic genius of a Ralph Winter. I've almost shed tears that I can't do what that man is involved in doing. I wish I could have the theological precision and articulateness of J.I. Packer. I wish I could have the intellectual power of a Jonathan Edwards. That's not going to happen. And I just go back to the Bible and say, the eye of the body is not the ear, and the foot is not the hand, and by the grace of God, I will do what I can do. So please, do not think I am saying, let's all be little Edwardses. Rather, let's just listen. Let's learn from this man's example what fits. And if it doesn't fit, then don't wear it. 4 exhortations I would like to give you from the life and ministry of this man in his theological labor. His theological labor. Admonition number 1. Be radically single-minded in your occupation with spiritual things. Be radically single-minded in your occupation with spiritual things. Edwards wrote 70 resolutions as a young Yale student. Let me read you 2 of them. Number 44. These are all in the double volume work here, by the way. Number 44. Resolved that no other end but religion. Now, let me stop here. Packer, last night, nailed religion. Religion in the 18th century, in the mouth of Jonathan Edwards, meant Christianity. Okay? You must be distinguishing and discerning at this point. It did not have the negative connotations in the mouth of Edwards that it does in our language today. Resolve that no other end but religion shall have any influence at all